The Ascent, a game that is considered July's sleeper hit, with a neon-soaked city on the horizon. I was excited to get into this game after the railroad crash of a certain high-profile game in the same thematic genre. Made by 11 people, right off the bat it's impressive to see what they're bringing to the table here. This game is on PlayStation, Xbox and PC. I played the game using the Xbox Game Pass, and I'm thrilled to be bringing this review to you, so without further ado, here is the Ascent review. Okay, I'm going to come out and say it. This game is more Cyberpunk than Cyberpunk itself. It didn't take me long to be blown away by Velez. This is the city that we play in. As I mentioned before, the neon lit landscape is what separates this game from the same of its type. The city looked and felt alive, from flying taxis to people hanging out on the city streets. It felt gritty and real. But most importantly, it felt as if this could be an actual place. Every building is so well thought out and designed. And as I peered at the landscape and admired this prodigious tower, I suddenly felt so small, dwarfed by a building of such a size. And when you take into account the camera angle, you really get this feeling that you're a tiny cog in a colossal machine. The game is littered with appropriately themed locations and citizens. At no point did I ever feel like the main hub was the be-all and end-all. I traversed the levels with excitement and also a bit of trepidation, as I never knew what was coming around the corner. Much to my surprise, whenever I did encounter a completely new zone, it felt natural to the overarching level design. In my opinion, I never felt like anything was out of place or that the devs had popped in buildings just to fill out space. It seems like everything was carefully planned out and executed in a way that the areas just seamlessly flowed into each other. A perfect example of this is when I visited the next floor of this massive tower we inhabit. The high street area was bustling with stores and neon signs. I slowly made my way through this area, admiring the incredibly detailed artwork, and before I knew it, I was in an oriental themed part of the world. I was genuinely surprised at how subtle the transition was. I went back to the high street, retraced my footsteps, but instead I was watching the background the entire time. I noticed that the buildings ever so gradually change in theme, adding more and more elements the closer you get to the next area. It was never abrupt and it never took me out of the experience, and considering that this game was only made by 11 people, it's truly a testament to the passion and dedication to building an immersive game. Other impressive elements included your character model. As you progress through the game, earning more credits, you'll get upgrades in the form of cybernetics. Each one drastically changes how your character looks. Cybernetic eyes, mechanical legs, or even a massive radio backpack. Each added individual flair to the character, and the flair doesn't end there though. NPCs suitably look the part, wearing dystopian cyberpunk themed clothing and mods to match, and the game is teeming with them. It felt like everyone I'd ever spoke to had their own design and fashion sense. Now I realize in hindsight that it's a clever combination of color rotation and clothing rotation, which allows this system to be so immersive. But nonetheless, visually speaking, I felt right at home with the citizens of Velez. What about the weapons, you say? Do they fit the theme? Yes they do. The cherry on the graphical cake was the weapons, actually. You have a few different variations of weapons, from things like ballistic, heat, and energy. Each felt and looked punchy and appropriate for their own design. At one point, I found a heat desert eagle that was ripping through organic enemies. I then arrived at a robot factory and switched to an energy rifle that literally blasted holes in them. A rippling energy projectile sounds so weighty in your hands, and looks even better on screen. The neon slaughter of the Ascent had me glued to my screen. It almost felt like I'd never blinked, as I don't want to miss even one juicy cyberpunk-like detail. The world, the people, the guns, it made me feel like this is what Cyberpunk 2077 should have been. And I understand that they're different types of games, I totally get that. But there's a lot to learn from smaller studios with devs who aren't mandated by some kind of corporate policy. Let the passion flow, and great things will surely come. The Ascent is a twin-stick shooter, and it rigidly sticks to that. You shoot things some more, and finally you shoot even more things. That being said though, it's an RPG kinda. You can upgrade your various weapons and find armor and buy cybernetics, all of which can be found as you're blasting your way through these levels. There are little dialogue options here and there, which are only present for the main storyline campaign, and other than buying, finding, upgrading your gear, there really aren't that many RPG elements. I'd call this game a twin-stick shooter with ultra RPG-light elements, and that being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The twin stick gameplay is incredibly satisfying, and it has various additions to spice it up, like abilities that make you use special attacks. One fight you might be superhero diving onto an enemy, and the next you could be jumping into a mech a la Titanfall, one to slow down time, or even revert all damage done in a short window. Well, you can do that too. The game really doesn't pull any punches when it comes to combat. It by no means is a long game, but the combat was more than enough to carry me through all the way to the end, and a little bit more. There's something so satisfying about slowing down time and weaving my way through bullets with the grace of a ballerina. It was an incredibly engaging experience, even when the ungodly difficulty spike kicks in. Traditionally, whenever I play games, I like to grind. I get my character up to scratch before tackling the story, so in this game I naturally did the same thing, always being ahead of the curve, so to speak. Until the late game, where enemy numbers and the levels skyrocket at an unreasonable pace. At one point I had to go back and grind my way back up, find some new gear, because the game simply stacked the odds against me. Whether it be missiles that can basically one-shot me, or hordes of enemies with plasma homing in guns, it's like, whoa, okay, fine, fair enough. Not that I'm against difficult games, and as someone who routinely plays every Souls game, I definitely felt as if the difficulty spike could be tuned a little bit, especially for someone who's playing solo. Speaking of solo, you can play this by yourself, or with up to 4 players. I myself played it solo the whole way through, and it's totally viable. I haven't played the multiplayer, but I am aware of a few issues which I'll go over in the How Does It Run section. There are tons of side quests and bounties to collect in the Ascent. These side missions do a good job of adding flavour to the context of the game, but they never really do anything to add to the main story, and often feel like they run in a different direction to everything else. Saying that though, they do offer buffed up gear and some occasionally funny dialogue, so in my opinion they are worth doing. Surprisingly though, the endgame is quite scarce, and having done basically every side quest prior to finishing the story, I found that there were only a couple of new side quests. There are also a couple of weapons and armors that show up in the post game, but yeah, it's quite scarce. I also realised the privilege that we've had with games like Skyrim and The Witcher, and that it would be unfair to judge the Ascent by the same standards. Still though, I would have liked to see a boss rush or horde mode. That would have been awesome for this kind of game. So the basic premise is that you're a worker on Veles, a cyberpunk dystopia based in a corporate-run arcology, and for those of you who don't know what an arcology is, it's essentially used to describe a mixture between architecture and ecology, used for mostly dense city environments that are dependent on each other. Anyways, lesson over. As a worker of this city, you are essentially chained to a life of servitude as a way to pay for your residency in a city. The corporations own you, and so you run errands for them until one day everything goes to hell. A major corporation is missing from the system, leaving everything in its wake, paralysed by a barrage of red tape and bureaucracy, with other corporations vying for control for this new stomping ground. Your character is on a journey to earn their freedom one way or another. The foundation for the game is solid and had me intrigued from the get-go. After watching several dev interviews and pre-release footage, I was eager to get my hands on this game. With a cyberpunk-shaped void in my soul, I longed for something that could at least partially fill that void. The story of the Ascent is actually fairly interesting. I found myself wanting to progress the story, anticipating some kind of corporate espionage. As the story unfolds, you'll learn what makes the city tick. The main story does a sufficient job in pulling you along at a steady pace, unlocking further areas along with new guns, mods and armor. With these new areas come new characters, who act as a thickening agent for the story. Eventually the story evolved into this scandalous story of betrayal and espionage which kept me hooked until the very end. There weren't any standout characters for me though, as everyone is a little bit of an asshole, and not in a charismatic sense. Everyone in the game is generally unlikable, which reflects the game world, where the normal person is fighting just to survive, and they have their own demons to deal with, and that's okay. I found that the main character was quite funny actually. As you progress through the story, you see changes in the character's demeanor, as he ever so casually dispatches people in the cutscenes. You almost feel like a bad guy, it's hilarious. And you can see that this game sets out the path for a sequel very early on. With a large and more open narrative being hinted at, the insidious corporate plot seems like something that could have been full on for a TV series on Netflix. I'm interested to see where this series goes and what the developers are capable of if they do a sequel. How does it run? So I ran the game on 4K with everything at Ultra initially. I had a couple of hiccups as I started the game, so let me run you through them. Firstly, there seemed to be a lot of stuttering, especially when I first started up the campaign. micro stutters become oppressingly annoying. You'll notice them almost immediately if you're running a more powerful graphics card and the FPS is more prone to fluctuations. I eventually ended up lowering the shadow settings and the effect settings from ultra to high, and I turned off motion blur, which is only available for DirectX 12 along with the ray tracing options. Even then though, during certain high octane fights, I would have large frame drops, specifically on this one boss who launches a missile salvo, repeatedly by the way. And it's even worse when you get two of the same boss along with lots of ads. I checked my FPS graph during that fight and I had 8 massive frame drops in the space of a minute, and naturally death ensued. In fact, most of my in-game deaths were due to this double boss fight and this boss's special attack, which I call frame drop bonanza. Okay, so that was more than a couple of hiccups, I know. There have also been multiple reports of various crashes, game-breaking bugs, black screens in multiplayer specifically. Now that I think about it, Wasteland 3 also had multiplayer issues, and I can't help but think that it's mighty complicated for devs to ensure that all these systems run smoothly for multiple players in their games. For some players, this has been a deal breaker, and understandably so. Game-breaking bugs are not fun at all and can taint the experience for any player, no matter how versed that player is in video games. As a final note, I played solo, so I didn't have various crashes or game-breaking bugs and black screens like I mentioned. It's worth knowing that if you are going to play this game in multiplayer, there are issues. Keep that in mind, and if you want more information, I'd suggest looking at some technical reviews to help your understanding of the issue. Action set pieces in the Ascent can be an absolute blast, and I don't just mean literally. The Ascent has its moments of badass music like the one I just played, and it's a shame that there weren't more of these set pieces. I quite enjoyed the music for a game like this. Bassy, heavy, trappy, in the moment, as I battled these massive mechs in this cyberpunk world, with the subtle sounds of bullets as they enter my time-flowing bubble, everything sounding muffled as the bubble distorts all the exterior sounds. It's a nice touch, and these details are scattered throughout the game. But as you probably noticed, there were some audio bugs that were present at the time of the review. Most of the time I didn't notice them in the moment until after the hectic battle was over. The weapon sounds in this game are amazing, especially when listening through headphones. The audio balance is just right in regards to that. What I found really interesting is that every weapon felt like you were actually doing major damage to your opposition, and the headphones bring out the very minute details of fine sound design. I really appreciated it. When it came to surround sound though, so I'm using a Logitech set of speakers and it's a 5.1 system, I did notice some audio inconsistencies, and they are a little more prominent, especially with the more like rapid firing weapons like the minigun. Not immersion breaking, but still something I should highlight. Lastly, the voice acting. It's strange, the voice audio quality is great, it's clear, concise and understandable, but I never felt any emotions from these characters. And as I mentioned in writing the story, everyone in this game is a bit of an asshole, and they have the same intonation and verbal mannerisms. Whether this is due to budget constraints or design decisions, it's hard to say. Generally speaking though, voice actors are at the mercy of the character design and the writing, and this definitely rears its head here, I feel. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the review. The Ascent had the potential to be a top tier game, from its world design to its characters and its weapons, and the story, the engaging story that pulled me in and made me want a sequel. I think there are so many good things there. Considering it was made by a team of 11 people, it's so impressive. Now, the only thing is that it was let down by technical mishaps. Stutters, crashes, blue screens, black screens, these are not good things to have in your game, and it seemed like it needed a bit more time just to have those patches put in to fix those issues. Otherwise though, I think this is a really good game. I'm not going to give it a green light and say it's truly excellent, because it does need that refinement, but I'm going to give it a green and amber light. It needs work, it needs those patches, and then once that's happened, I'm going to revisit the game briefly and I may update my score. But for now though, green and amber light, okay? Now guys, thanks to those of you who have been supporting me and you show me love in the comments. I really appreciate it. I'm going to keep bringing these reviews to you. And if you're new to the channel and you like the content, don't forget to like. If you love the content and you really want to kind of get to know my reviews and see how I do things, then sub, hit that notification bell. Guys, thank you. This has been the Bearded Breakdown, and I will see you on the next breakdown. Bye.